There's a quiet moment that hits you sometime in your early 30s. It doesn't come with fanfare or fireworks. It arrives in the stillness, on a long commute, in a late night scroll, or while brushing your teeth. It's the moment you realize you're not becoming who you thought you'd be. You've checked some boxes, dodged some mistakes, but somewhere in the busyness, the noise, the deadlines, you feel it, an ache, a subtle grief, a question forming beneath your routines. What am I actually building here? Because your 20s were all motion, forward, up, outward. But your 30s? They ask for direction, not more speed, but more clarity, not more achievements, but more alignment. And if you're not careful, you'll spend your 30s chasing everything, except the things that actually matter. Section 1: The Illusion of Arrival. In your 20s, life is often framed as a checklist: career, relationship, apartment, experiences. A sense that once you arrive, things will finally make sense. But in your 30s, you learn the painful truth. There is no final arrival. No single job, title, or partner will eliminate self doubt. No city or salary will deliver lasting peace. Because fulfillment isn't found in the thing, it's found in the fit. How well your choices reflect who you truly are, not just what the world told you to want. In this decade, arrival is replaced by alignment, and alignment requires something uncomfortable: honesty. Section 2: The Myth of More Money. More followers, more productivity. This is the drumbeat of modern adulthood, but your 30s will slowly teach you a radical truth. More isn't always better. More responsibilities don't always mean more impact. More attention doesn't mean more intimacy. More work doesn't guarantee more worth. At some point, chasing more becomes a distraction from enough. And enough, real, soul satisfying enough, is always quiet. It won't scream for your attention, but you'll feel it in your chest when something finally fits. Section 3: Redefining Success. Success in your 30s becomes less about how you're seen and more about how you feel when no one's watching. You start to notice what drains you, what lights you up, what you're willing to sacrifice, and what you'll never sacrifice again. It's not always a sexy process. Sometimes it looks like quitting a high paying job. Sometimes it looks like declining the invitation, staying in, changing careers, or admitting, I was wrong, because real success is deeply personal. And in your 30s, it becomes less about impressing people and more about coming home to yourself. Section 4: The Weight of Time. Time shifts in your 30s. It stops feeling infinite. You begin to sense, not intellectually but viscerally, that life is not a dress rehearsal. You catch yourself measuring time in before and after. Before the job, before the breakup, before the baby, after the move, after the diagnosis, after the quiet decision to change everything. Oliver Berkman reminds us we only get about 4,000 weeks in a lifetime, which means that every yes carries the weight of 1,000 unseen no's. In your 30s, you begin to ask deeper questions about how you spend your hours, not just for productivity, but for meaning. Not how can I do more, but what is actually worth doing if I know I can't do it all. Section 5: The Quiet Power of Boundaries. You used to think boundaries were selfish, that saying no meant you were difficult, uncooperative, maybe even cold. You thought being available made you valuable, that stretching yourself thin was a sign of loyalty, of love, of worth. But somewhere in your 30s, something shifts. You realize you've been exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. Not just from doing too much, but from allowing too much. You begin to see that people will take as much as you offer, not because they're malicious, but because you never showed them the line. So you start drawing it, and it feels terrifying at first. You worry they'll think you're rude, that you'll lose them, that the peace won't be worth the discomfort. But what you find over time is that boundaries aren't barriers. They're clarity. They don't keep people out. They simply tell the truth about what's welcome and what's not. Boundaries are not walls. They are doors with intentional locks. They are the architecture of a sane, sustainable life. Nedra Tawwab says that peace doesn't come from controlling others. It comes from being clear with yourself. And in your 30s, clarity becomes a quiet superpower. You start to notice subtle things. how your chest tightens around certain people, how your energy spikes in some rooms and drains in others, how some conversations leave you calm, while others leave you questioning your own sanity. You stop performing emotional labor that was never yours to carry. You stop saying yes just to avoid the discomfort of someone else's disappointment. And perhaps most importantly, you stop explaining your no, because your no is a full sentence, and your time, your peace, your mental bandwidth, these are not renewable resources. You begin to treat your energy like currency. You no longer invest in chaos hoping for clarity. You no longer overgive hoping to earn love. You start trusting your yes, the real ones, the whole body ones, the ones that don't come from guilt or obligation, but from desire, alignment, truth. And yes, some people won't like the new you, the one with boundaries, the one with edges, the one who no longer makes herself small just to make others comfortable. Let them go, because the relationships that thrive in the presence of your boundaries, those are the ones that were meant to last anyway. Section 6. The joy you almost forgot to chase. Here's a strange realization. You spent your 20s craving freedom, and now in your 30s, you have some of it, but you're too busy to feel it. Fun becomes something to schedule. Joy feels like a guilty pleasure. Somewhere along the way, you began confusing happiness with accomplishment. Catherine Price makes a compelling case. Fun isn't frivolous, it's fuel. And in your 30s, the fun you make space for isn't about escape. It's about aliveness. Not everything you love needs to be monetized. Not every hour needs to be optimized. Sometimes what matters most is laughter, spontaneity, creativity, joy with no agenda. Section 7. Relationships are reflections. In your 20s, love is often about the chase, the spark, the story. But in your 30s, love shifts. It becomes less about who excites you and more about who expands you. You start to realize that chemistry without compatibility is chaos, that attraction alone isn't enough to build a life, that the patterns you ignore early on will become the prisons you live in later. Esther Perel reminds us, the quality of your relationships determines the quality of your life. And by your 30s, that truth starts to land. You begin to examine your patterns, your attachment wounds, your projections, your unspoken needs. You see how love isn't just found, it's built, slowly, honestly, with people who are emotionally safe, not just exciting. You stop looking for someone to complete your story and start looking for someone who will help you rewrite it. Section 8. Identity isn't fixed, it's chosen. Who you thought you'd be at 20 isn't who you are now. And that's not failure, that's evolution. Your 30s are an identity reckoning. The stories you've carried about your potential, your personality, your path, start to feel tight. You begin to ask, do I believe this because it's true? Or because I've repeated it long enough to feel safe in it? James Clear talks about habits shaping identity, not just by what you do, but by what you signal to yourself every day. And Herminia Ibarra reminds us that identity is not discovered, it's constructed through action, through experiment, through the willingness to say, this no longer fits. And that's okay. Your 30s are when you stop defending the past version of yourself. Section 9. The inner life becomes non-negotiable. The external world is deafening. Deadlines ping, notifications flash, expectations mount. Silent but heavy, like a pressure you can't quite name. And for a while you think that managing all of it, the noise, the hustle, the calendar full of everything, is the mark of success. That staying busy means staying relevant. That keeping up means keeping safe. But somewhere in your 30s, the real war reveals itself. Not outside. Inside, it's not the emails. It's the voice in your head that says you're failing because you haven't answered them fast enough. It's not the decisions, it's the anxiety that lingers after you've made them. Looping back, wondering if you chose wrong. It's the invisible tension of always doing without ever just being. This is the moment you begin to understand something that sounds simple, but changes everything. Inner peace is not a luxury, it's survival. Michael Singer says, you are not your thoughts, you are the one who observes them. And that distinction, once intellectual, becomes spiritual. You begin to realize just how often you've been swept away by the voice in your mind. How much of your life has been lived not in the present, but in commentary about it, ruminating, replaying, rehearsing arguments that never happen. And so you begin, tentatively, humbly, to reclaim your space. Not by escaping the world, but by creating tiny sanctuaries within it. You learn to pause before reacting. You learn to notice the thought without obeying it. You learn that discomfort doesn't have to be fixed. It can simply be felt. Susan David calls this emotional agility, the capacity to be with your emotions without being run by them. You're not here to suppress your fear, you're here to hold it, name it, understand it, without letting it steer the wheel. You meditate, not to become enlightened, but to soften the static, to return to the breath, to find that one quiet place inside you that doesn't panic when everything else does. You journal, not to impress, but to be radically honest, to give shape to the fog, to stop lying to yourself in silence. You realize your mental health isn't just something to check in on after a breakdown. It's the foundation, the baseline, the hidden infrastructure behind every decision, relationship, and dream. When the inner life is neglected, everything external becomes brittle. Even success feels hollow. Even love feels unsafe. But when the inner life is tended to, when your nervous system is soothed, your thoughts observed, your emotions validated, everything else begins to shift. Not because life got easier, but because you got steadier. And in a world addicted to noise, your stillness becomes a quiet rebellion. Section 10. The life you choose to build by now, you've seen behind the curtain. You've tasted success and felt how hollow it can be. You've hit low points and noticed how little the world notices. You've tried being who you thought they wanted. And now, you're curious about who you actually are. That's the quiet miracle of your 30s. It's not the loud transformation. It's the subtle, sacred shift from living by default to living by design. You choose your people. You choose your values. You choose the voice you listen to inside your head. And slowly, without fanfare, you begin building something real. Not for show, not for status, but for peace, for alignment, for joy. Not a perfect life, but a life that feels like yours. It's like, here's the truth you finally see. It never mattered how impressive you looked on paper. It never mattered how quickly you climbed the ladder. It never mattered how many boxes you checked to prove you were on track. What mattered, and always will, is how present you are in your own story. How brave you are to change. How kind you are to yourself along the way. And how deeply you choose to live it instead of just perform. Because the life that actually matters, it's not the one they told you to want. It's the one you wake up grateful to live. One conscious, courageous choice at a time.